Hello and welcome to our third Bruin Career Insights event on YouTube Live. My name is Angela Scales. I'm a fellow Bruin and I serve as the Senior Director of Bruin Connections here at the UCLA Alumni Association. Thank you all for joining us tonight as we share a recruiter's top tips for job seekers. Bruin Career Insights focuses on career development resources for every stage of the career lifecycle. In addition to this series, a great career resource is UCLA One. We hope that you'll utilize UCLA One as a tool and a resource for professional development and networking. For those who aren't familiar with the site, it's super easy to remember. It's just uclaone.com. After tonight's events, we'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for upcoming topics. So email us at careerprograms@alumni.ucla.edu with any thoughts. Also, a quick thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like this possible. It's through your continued support that we're able to provide career programming for Bruins of all ages. Also, one quick housekeeping measure. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you should see the live chat function. Using the live chat, you can send questions throughout the session. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. And now on to our main event. Our speaker tonight is Kate Pletcher, a 2007 grad of the Anderson School of Management. Kate is the CEO and founder of Treehouse Partners, a recruiting firm based here in Los Angeles. So Kate, why don't we get started by having you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started as a recruiter.
Thank you so much, Angela. It's really a pleasure to be here with my fellow Bruins. I actually didn't take kind of a traditional path to recruiting. My first job out of undergrad, I was a Badger undergrad. I went to Wisconsin. My first job out of undergrad was actually sales in Western New York. I was selling advertising for Howard Stern's radio station or his show. And then I sold mattresses in Western New York before coming out here to go to business school at Anderson. After business school, I went into kind of a combination of sales and strategy and marketing and, ended up taking the format of licensing, which when it all comes down to it, it's all about kind of partnerships and bringing people together and kind of matchmaking. So when I decided to start my own company, I spent a long time thinking about what I was good at and what I really love to do. And really that was connecting people. So I let the idea kind of simmer for about a year and finally decided to quit my day job and open my recruiting firm. And that was 6.5 years ago. And here we are, no turning back. It's been really wonderful. Obviously, really excited about being a Bruin and have tried to give back to the community, but also continue to kind of get from the community throughout my experience as an alum. I've had the fortune of being able to teach the undergrads there at UCLA, and I'm going to be teaching a course at Anderson starting this fall. So very excited. Also involved in Bruin Professionals, which is an awesome organization for professionals who want to connect with other either alums from Anderson or the law school or the undergrad and help each other's businesses grow. So just love the school and love being a Bruin.
That's fantastic. So why don't we dive into the top tips countdown. Number 10, first impressions. How do you ensure a good first impression?
This one is more of a how do you ensure not a bad first impression, right? Because if you just do the basics, you'll be fine. I think people sometimes forget the details. They forget that you should get a haircut if you're about to go interview for a bunch of jobs, and make sure there isn't dirt under your nails, all the things that your grandma told you should do. So really thinking about that professional appearance. Of course, being in the recruiting industry, I have a number of horror stories. I'll tell you a couple because A, they're really funny and it's the end of the day and I want people to stay alert, but B, I think they're kind of representative of, what not to do. One example was when I was interviewing someone in person one time. This young man showed up with a suit on and he looked really sharp and he was great. Came into my office and the first thing he asked was, "Do you mind if I take my jacket off?" And he took his jacket off and put it on the chair. Immediately it was obvious this guy was not going to proceed to the next round. And it was almost offensive to me to think, hey, it. You wore it for me. So certainly don't take it. You didn't wear it for the car ride or the hallway or whatever. So, that's one. Another very funny one was that a person was wearing very strong cologne and just didn't really, you couldn't focus on what he was saying because the whole room was just, trying to deal with that. I've heard people with really long nails, can be distracting. So thinking about that. I also think, in the interview process and in the recruiting process, there's a lot of intermediaries that you'll come in contact with. Could be a recruiter, could be a, front desk person, could be someone like that. And not forgetting that oftentimes those folks have an opportunity to give input on candidates as well. So just treating everyone with incredible respect and keeping in mind that you're interviewing. I interviewed a person, my favorite story, I think, as a recruiter, I interviewed a person maybe a year or so ago, and they apparently didn't realize that it actually was an interview because when I asked them, we were on a Skype, I asked them, hey, I feel like I know the place where you're at. Are you at Bar Food on Wilshire? And he said, yeah, I am actually. They have a great happy hour. He proceeded to lift a beer up and say, yeah, it's a perfect place because there's Wi-Fi. It was just like one of these moments where, he just hadn't thought. He was being very casual. He thought, hey, she's just the intermediary. You got to consider that everyone you're kind of coming in contact with has the potential to move you forward or not. And either way, you should be respectful of that, of your fellow citizens anyway. So that's really what I mean by first impressions. Just take a look in the mirror before you head out the door and maybe have your roommate give you a little sniff too.
That's great advice. So, okay, and number 9 is the network. We're always hearing about how you need to harness the power of your network. So what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's an awesome one. So, depending on what survey you look at, somewhere between 75 and 80% of jobs are obtained through a connection. So, we spend all this time throwing resumes up on Monster or Career Builder, applying to the black hole, and really more often than not, we're going to get that job through someone we know or through a friend of a friend. So what I mean by that is to not just think about the basics, maybe, although I'll say a lot of people don't even tell their friends when they're looking for a new job. So definitely do the basics, tell your friends, tell your family, make sure you're kind of updating your LinkedIn profile so that you're attractive to a recruiter or a company. But to think about other places where you might be able to make a connection. Think about people who, maybe you met when you were a freshman in college, who they were, in your fraternity, but a couple years older, who are doing something cool. Reach out to them. Neighbors, your family, of course, but also your family's friends. I mean, you hear about people getting jobs because their, dad's fraternity brother owns a company. That actually happens, and it's okay to leverage those types of relationships. So, there's all those kind of personal connections, but then there's also more formal things you can do, like networking groups or networking events, volunteer opportunities. If someone, particularly if you're looking to make a shift to a different industry or a slightly different functional area that you don't necessarily have experience with in your current role, gaining that experience in a volunteer capacity, or at least getting exposure to people in that capacity, will help them be able to vouch for you. Hey, I don't know much about that person's finance skills, but I can say that I've been working with them at XYZ nonprofit on a volunteer basis for 3 years, and they've been awesome at everything they've done. So I'm certain that they'd be good at this. Just thinking about that network is a little bit broader than just kind of your inner circle.
Right. And like you said, you never know who that person knows. They might not be in that industry, but a colleague of theirs might be in the industry you're looking to get into. So number 8 is the experience matrix. Tell us what that is and how you would use it.
Sure. So this was a tool actually I learned about when I was in business school, because I think, when you're in an interview, you only have oftentimes a half an hour to really get across why you're so great potentially for this role. And you sometimes people fall back on the same old stories again. here's a time when I did this, or here's a strength of mine. And they're always talking about that last job that they had, and yet their resume has all these other experiences on it. So an experience matrix gives you an opportunity to make sure that the stories you're telling and the examples you're giving are diverse and represent a number of different areas in your career. So I'll share, now this is kind of embarrassing because I really haven't looked at this for a long time. This was an experience matrix I created, I think, right when I was applying for jobs out of business school. So don't look so much at the content as much as the concept here. So on the left-hand side, hopefully everyone's seeing that. Are you seeing that, Angela? Yeah. Okay, so on the left-hand side, I put in words literally from the job description, as well as questions that I'm guessing that interviewer is going to ask. And on the right, the columns I made have me list out kind of, in many ways, very specific examples of a time when I demonstrated that quality. And you'll note that I have two different professional experience ones, as well as an academic, typically. And so I, went in there and kind of filled this out. What are examples of times when I had to be very creative? So that when I'm answering these questions, I can hop around here. And, sometimes I'm going to be talking about, my Anderson experience. Sometimes it's going to be, a role I had before business school. Sometimes it's going to be after business school. I can kind of jump around and give these examples very, in quite a varied way, which is really helpful. The other thing, the time when I use this is really, in just thinking about what kind of jobs I'm applying for and kind of that whole career, mentorship of myself. I'll oftentimes do this sort of thing, but probably more importantly, this is the tool that I print out, and right before I'm going to hop on an interview, or I'm, out in the parking lot about to walk in for the interview, this is kind of my cheat sheet. I'm going to look at this thing one last time, and it's going to be in my mind right before I go into that interview, so that I have a little bit more confidence, and I have some, some arrows in my back, what's the phrase? Arrows in my quiver to be able to pull out when the questions get asked. Obviously, if you're doing a phone interview, you can have this thing printed out and right in front of you, and that can give you some confidence. But either way, it's just a really great tool that I recommend everyone on the call create.
That's great. It really, like you said, allows you to prep an answer to all of those pieces, so that when a question comes up, you're just going to that matrix in your mind, and you can pull from it instead of coming up with it on the fly in terms of those different skill sets.
That's right.
So number 7 is the little details. What little details should people pay attention to when it comes to resumes, cover letters, thank you notes?
Excellent. Yes. So as a recruiter, when I'm looking through resumes or LinkedIn profiles, I'm just being candid with you people, I'm looking for a reason to knock you out. More often than not, we have more candidates, more resumes, more applications than we want or need. And we have to find a way to filter through those pretty quickly, particularly for roles that require detail orientation. If there's a typo, if there's inconsistencies with capitalization, or there's inconsistencies with how deep you go on kind of talking about what you've done, that can be a reason to knock you out. I think people too often rush through the final 10% of an application process, and that's where mistakes happen. Also, oftentimes people are applying for many jobs, and so, common mistakes they'll see is that they'll reference a different company in the cover letter. Great, guess what? You just saved me 5 minutes. I can just knock you out, and I don't need to even read your resume, right? So those little details, and if you don't have a great, roommate or spouse or friend who can take a look at every single one, you need to at least take a look at it, because one little proofread will help, get rid of 99% of those. I also think what I am referring to in the details is things like thank you notes. I can't tell you how often our clients, who are the company's hiring folks, tell us, man, I only got 2 thank you notes out of those 5 candidates I interviewed. Those oftentimes, I know companies out there, I specifically, given my role, know of companies that make a mark as to whether or not you got a thank you note, and that's a major factor in whether or not you proceed. So it's the right thing to do in general, but also it's not, they're looking for any reason to move on to other candidates, so don't give them one. I think that the customization thing is important too. I can't tell you how often still in what is it, 2017? I just checked because it's hard to keep track of that. I still get emails and letters to me that say, "Dear Sir." Insane, right? I'll also get emails that are addressed to the wrong person, right? So small things like that, just be careful with the details.
I can appreciate that. I've gotten a few applications over the years that say, "I'd love to come and work for you at University of Southern California." And you can imagine how awkward that is.
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome though, right? Because you can just delete the email and move on. So
yeah. So that actually brings us to a question we got in advance from Sandra. She said, "How do I structure my resume, and are bullet points the best option?"
Yeah. Great question. I'm not sure how much time we have because this requires 6 more hours of time. How do you structure a resume? So I'll give you some high level stuff. Bullet points, yes, definitely. We do not want to read paragraphs. Again, you've got to make it really easy for these people. They're looking at maybe hundreds of resumes. They want to get to the point, right? A big key is structuring those bullets, at least the majority of them, in a situation, action, result kind of pattern. So, took over a group of 10 underperforming salespeople, so that's the situation. Implemented systems and processes or incentive, systems and processes so that's the action, increased sales by 20% within 1 year, right? So kind of you're talking about the before you got there, what you did, and then what the result of that, particularly whenever you can incorporate numbers and real facts. And by the way, do not lie. That's really helpful. Those are the kind of bullet points that I'd rather see, like 2 of those bullet points than 10 that just list out your tasks that you manage in that role. So bullet points are helpful because it's a broad question. How should I structure a resume? I'd say just in general, make sure you do include dates. It doesn't really matter if it's, chronological from start to finish or finish to start. None of those details matter as much. I do like, particularly for experienced professionals, a little bit of an executive summary up top, just so that, I can kind of get your little whole spiel of what I'm about to read in a couple of sentences. And then if it looks good, I'll read more. So that's helpful. And then I'll end by saying one thing that I would love to just banish from all resumes. So I hope you're writing this down, people. I think this was a practice maybe 10 years ago, and I remember hearing this advice, but I think putting an objective on a resume is silly. An objective is what you are hoping to get out of your next job. Guess what? If I'm looking to hire you, I don't really care what you're looking to get out of your next job. I care what you can bring to me. So objective is just kind of a silly thing that we should be getting rid of.
That's great advice. So number 6 is social media. I know in working with students here at UCLA, I'm often harping on them in terms of their social media presence and its impact during their job search. So how can Bruins clean up their social media?
So we'll go back to what your grandma tells you. I think particularly when you're job, you have to know in this day and age, people are going to find you. You can certainly put in settings, privacy settings, so they're not going to go that deep, but a quick Google image search of you will find some things. So be aware of that. Do your own Google search on you regularly, especially when you're job hunting. Don't just go to the first page, go to the 3rd page, see what's showing up. Make sure that is representative. And I'm not saying, hey, we don't ever want to see a photo of you drinking. If all of your photos are you sitting in a perfect scenario and you've never done anything bad, maybe that's going to be a bad thing. We want reality really, but we just don't want your worst reality. So, be aware of that. The other thing I'd say, a lot of times people are looking to hire, particularly for the more recent grads on the webinar today, they're looking to hire someone who has a little bit of social media savvy, right? Like that's part of what you're bringing to the table. Even if you're doing a finance role or something, they want you to have that. So, and particularly if you're applying for a social media or marketing role, it's pretty important that you've demonstrated in your online presence that you have those skills. So for example, I was interviewing someone last week for a public relations role, and immediately I went to her Twitter feed and saw that she hasn't tweeted anything for 2 years. Now I understand Twitter is dying or whatever. I know I should have been on her Snapchat or something. I don't know. But if you're kind of claiming, as she was on her resume, that she's a social media expert and that's kind of part of her life and she lives and breathes it, I would think that she would have demonstrated that she's pretty active on the major platforms. So, be aware of that, I think, and then just listen to whatever Angela and everyone else, including your grandma, tells you to do.
Yeah, if your grandma didn't want to see it, or you'd be uncomfortable with your grandma seeing it on Facebook, probably best to take it off when you're job searching.
Exactly.
So number 5, interviews are a two-way street. I know that we often hear that the interview is also an applicant's opportunity to see if the organization is a good fit for them. So what does that mean, and what are some of the examples of questions or topics that you should be asking as the applicant?
Yeah, that's a great one, because it's kind of a delicate balance, right? You don't want to get into the interview and be like, okay, now you've asked me 2 questions. Tell me, what's the mission? Really, what's the triple bottom line here? You don't want to start drilling them to give them the sense that, you're kind of cocky about your skills and you could get a job anywhere and you're interviewing them more than them interviewing you. So it is a fine balance. I think every single interview you have, for the most part, though, there will be 5 to 10 minutes at the end of that conversation to ask some questions of the interviewer. And it is important for you to really understand what you're getting into. So first of all, as you continue on and get second round, third round, that dinner with the CEO, whatever, escalation you have kind of the right to ask more and more kind of revealing questions, I think. And even towards the end, let's say they give you an offer, you have the right and should probably say, hey, I never got to speak to someone exactly at my level. Is there any way you'd be comfortable setting that up? So there will be chances to ask all of those questions, but some good ones to ask kind of early on. There's a decent chance that the person you're speaking with, this is your only time you're going to have a chance to speak with them. So I'd say take the time to be pretty personal about these questions. The generic, what's the culture like here? Or anything you could have found online about them or by kind of just getting a feel for things isn't that helpful. I like questions that are more along the lines of, particularly if they can show that you've done your research, right? So for example, hey, I've noticed you've been at the company for 4 years. I'm sure you get, headhunter calls all the time. What is it about this company that makes you want to stay here and not go to those other opportunities? Something that gives them a chance to kind of personally tell their story is pretty awesome. Other things that are really good is, particularly for someone who's in the thick of hiring and has probably spoken to a bunch of candidates, you can ask something along the lines of, this is a big company and they're growing. You've seen a lot of people come through. What has been kind of the common theme of the people who have been most successful here? Or on the flip side, I'm guessing a lot of people have left, when they leave, why? What's the reasoning behind that? So the more you can kind of personalize it and get their personal opinion and show that you've done a little bit of research, that's great. Save the generic questions maybe for you doing better research online, Glassdoor, on their website, on LinkedIn, etc.
That's great advice. So number 4, also kind of thinking about preparing for the interview. How do you prepare? What are your specific tips?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So there's kind of the like preparation and the studying and the research in advance, and then there's kind of like the day of preparation. So I'll start with the research piece. I think it's important to over-research. A lot of times you'll be scheduled to interview with Kate Pletcher, but Kate Pletcher, like a week and a half ago, lost her voice. And so my team had to take over all of my interviews. So the people who stood out to us were the people who didn't just know my background, but had also been to our website, had seen, the other people who work here, and were totally floored by the fact that another partner at Treehouse Partners was on the phone, or was on the Skype. So when you're looking at a company, try to kind of look at the most logical people that you might run into in the halls. For sure, know what the C-suite looks like in case you're, in the bathroom with them and washing hands, and have an opportunity to say, hey, I'm interviewing here, and really impressed by your mission in the company. So just wanted to introduce myself. I mean, wow, what an amazing opportunity. So you don't want to miss out on that. I think, shifting to more of the kind of day of stuff, certainly if it's a Skype or a Google Hangout or something like that, be aware of the background. Again, if we had more time, I would have many, many stories to share here. I'll tell you one, and this was actually an assistant interview, which we don't hire too many assistants, but we're interviewing someone who was basically going to be organizing someone's life. That was the role. In the background of, their interview, their video interview, it was just a disaster. It was a daybed. It's very vivid in my mind. It was a daybed with clothes spattered all over the place, a naked Barbie doll with, legs spread. The sheet was coming off the corner. As if that wasn't enough, when I said, hey, let's start out, can you just kind of walk me through your resume? They didn't have their resume with them. So, by the way, it should be in your brain, but they didn't have it. So they wanted to get up and go find it in the other room. And when they got up and turned around, butt crack. Okay, care of this. This is, you're on video. So thinking about kind of that background. Now, if you're going in person, I'm probably going to get kicked off all your webinars now that I said butt crack. Sorry about that. Now I said it twice. Oh, anyway. The kind of tactical stuff, right? I can't tell you how many people have lost the job because they've been even 5 or 10 minutes late, right? If you can't make it there on time for the interview, what are you going to be like as an employee? And I know LA traffic, right? But LA traffic, it's not news. It's not going to change. It's always going to be horrible. Run errands in the neighborhood if you have to, but get there an hour early. I think Coach Wooden has that quote about, if you're 5 minutes early, you're 10 minutes late. And it's even more so true in an interview. So just kind of mapping out your route, making sure that you really literally leave an hour buffer. And sure, if something disastrous happens, the last thing an interviewer wants is for you to be getting a speeding ticket or risking your life to get there. Make that call, though. Call them, not 10 minutes after you're supposed to be there, but a half an hour before, and say, hey, check out the news. You see that helicopter? I'm in that traffic jam right now. So that's the kind of preparation that I think a lot of people miss out on, and they just are used to, oh, it's LA, here's the excuse. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and it kind of almost goes back to number 10 with the first impressions of, if that's your first impression, being late, you're already starting out the gate in a, negative position.
That's right.
So number 3 is sensitive subjects. We know that there's a lot of hot topics out there right now, especially with the recent election. So what would be your tips for how to navigate sensitive subjects?
Avoid them. It's an easy one, right? You want to understand kind of the culture and the mission of the organization. And in some ways, you really do actually want to understand politically maybe where they stand. Let's say you're a hardcore Republican and you're about to join a group of hardcore, liberals, and it's just not going to feel comfortable. Do your research. But guess what? That research can happen by you looking at Facebook, by you looking at the blog posts and the Twitter feed of the, CEO, all of that, without you, kind of getting into the interview and say, oh man, can you believe that stuff on the news today, or whatever it might be. Do your research so that you get a sense for whether or not, your personality will align. And I would argue that, it's going to be better for you to be at a place where there's a diversity of opinions and a diversity of backgrounds, as opposed to just trying to join people who are exactly like you. But either way, you should do that research outside of kind of getting a feel while you're there. Now, you will have an opportunity oftentimes as you kind of proceed in the interview process to kind of have more and more intimate dialogue with the people that you'll be working with. I would still argue that it's still not the time for you to bring up, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, politics, any of those things. They may be something you're very passionate about, like a social justice issue or something like that. But the interview is really about your skills and your ability to do this job. The outside research will give you a sense for where they stand on some of that stuff. I'd also say that if it is something that's really important to you, in your volunteering at organizations or whatever it might be, make sure that's included on your resume and your LinkedIn profile. Not in a overt way, like this is the only way to define me, but that it's on there so that if there does happen to be a really mutual alignment with some of those issues or some of those things you care about, it's possible that they'd bring it up. And if they bring it up, you can respond. You obviously don't want to escalate things or make it go deeper, but that let them kind of take the lead and lay out the tone for those types of topics.
That's a great kind of, baseline. Like you said, don't bring them up. If they bring them up, then you can address them. Right. So number 2 is the offer letter. So you got it. Now what? What should you be assessing?
That's awesome. So yeah, it's funny how often, it's not that often, but a couple times a year, we have candidates who lose the job after they've gotten the offer letter. And the reason why is because they kind of change, right? They get this offer letter and now they kind of let their guard down and they feel like they can be, they can kind of be cocky and they can, ask for the world. I think you're still interviewing. There's a lot of ways this is kind of off the records, but there's a lot of ways companies can get out of an offer letter. I don't want to scare people, right? But oftentimes offer letters are contingent on references and backgrounds. So if they talk to a reference and that reference gives them an idea that maybe they're not going to be a great fit, they can pull that. So, I've had people who have listed me as a reference who were ex-employees of mine who I would never recommend. And I get the call and I can't be dishonest. I'm not going to trash talk them, but I'm going to be fairly honest. And especially if they didn't even give me a heads up that I was going to be getting this call, it's just unacceptable. And I don't want to hand my ex problem onto someone else, right? So be smart about your references. Continue to be an incredible person and remembering that you are still interviewing. So when you're interacting with, the admin or the HR person who's kind of helping you through things, continue to be awesome and be the person who you are. I think, when it comes to negotiating, which again, if we had 6 more hours, we could probably go even deeper on it. But when it comes to negotiating, sometimes people really are, penny wise, pound foolish. They get caught up on something small that, a year from now, it's not going to make any difference and it's just silly. So going into a negotiation with a pretty open mind, particularly for those on the webinar here who are looking at more entrepreneurial organizations or looking at roles for which they may be a little bit of a stretch for. A lot of times companies try to get kind of creative about their compensation. Hey, we can't quite give you the base that you were looking for, but we promise to put in a review for you in 90 days or 6 months. And at that point, we can reassess. They'll do things to kind of look to expand the pie as opposed to just figuring out who's going to get what slice of it. So you should be open-minded to that. And if you have in your mind, my salary needs to be exactly this and my bonus needs to be this and this needs to be my vacation time and whatever, you may pass up on your dream opportunity because of something as silly as that, so be flexible, be creative, offer up ideas, ask a lot of good questions, figure out, in the negotiation, figure out what really drives their decision-making. If they're saying we absolutely cannot move higher than this compensation for the manager level role, then you might be able to say, hey, is there a chance this could be a director level role? When is, on the timeline, when do you anticipate this potentially shifting if I'm a great performer? Asking kind of questions about that. And then guess what? If they're saying, actually, if you're awesome at this, we'd promote you to director in 3 months. Guess what? Get that in writing. Kind of say that. Okay, that's awesome. That's great for me because really I'm in it for the trajectory and the potential to grow here. Would you mind, like, if I were to just kind of incorporate that into the offer letter, that there would be like a consideration for director level in 6 months? Is that something you guys would consider? Thinking about just kind of different ways to skin the cat is really the message there, and continuing to be awesome about it, and remember that you're really still interviewing throughout this whole process.
Right. Yeah. And it could be, equity in a startup or something that could be huge down the road.
Or flexible hours, or, a lot of startups, my company does this. We have unlimited PTO, and so people never get hung up on how much vacation time they're going to get. There's a lot of companies that are getting creative about different kinds of incentives. So look at that, look at the whole package. I also sometimes have people who, get really hung up on the insurance and, hey, my premiums are going to be more than they were, at my last job. Oh, well, yeah, I'm getting paid 15 grand more, but still the insurance, we've got to fight for this. It's like, listen, there's a bunch of different levers on the finances of an offer. If one's a little bit smaller, maybe ask for a little bit more on the other. And so just consider that whole thing instead of getting hung up on any one element of an offer.
Definitely. So what's the number one tip, the most important piece of advice?
This one is mostly a shout out to the millennials on the call, but everyone really. I think the biggest tip I would give folks is to be prepared to work hard. When you get a new job, I always encourage my clients to take out the language around probationary period. Your first 90 days is a probationary period. I don't think that's kind of the mindset, but you really want to have some early wins. All too often people start and, a month in, they're starting to think about, oh, when's my next promotion? Or, gosh, I've been working really hard. I want to take a vacation, or I want to, I can't keep doing these weekends. I feel like your grandma when I say this, but when I was coming up, my first couple of jobs, they were legitimately 80+ hour weeks. And I was getting paid crap, and I was doing horrible work, and it was dumb and whatever. But, I put in my time, and it was awesome. I learned a lot. I had exposure to people. I was able, guess what? If you work twice as many hours, a lot of times you're going to have better results. And I don't mean, I'm not pushing people to burn themselves out or anything like that, because now I don't want to get in trouble with your parents. But I think too often, people get into their new job, and it's particularly, not speaking outside of the millennials here, if you got recruited to it, or you're kind of at a certain stage in your career where you don't necessarily have to do the dirty work. You know what? Do it. Earn the respect of everyone at the company, but also learn how the sausages are made. If you're there on the weekend, or you're there at night, or you're and I'm not just saying FaceTime, so on the just hard work while you're there, if you're making relationships with the accounting team, even though you're in marketing, and you're taking, someone in operations out to lunch just to kind of soak in everything you can, you're going to be way better at your function. So do that. I'd also say along those lines, don't expect or require your perfect dream job in your next jump. Whether it's your first job or you're shifting to a new role, oftentimes, especially as a recruiter, I hear kind of what people are looking for, and they just have a really long list of non-negotiables. What I would recommend is, if there's a company whose mission is exciting to you, the culture's great, and there's a role that you can actually do and you have the skills for, even if it's not your dream job and maybe it has a little more dirty work than you want, get in there. And if you kill it at that job, when your dream job opens up, you'll be really well positioned to go after it. So, think about that, and just be willing to kind of roll up your sleeves. The people I've seen who are most successful in the placements we've made are the people who just volunteer to help out. Whenever there's a problem, they say, hey, I'll take a stab at it. They're very proactive, and they just have kind of insatiable curiosity for how the organization works and getting involved in anything that they can to help it get better and bigger.
That's great advice. And like you said, leadership will recognize that and see that in their attitude.
Yeah. And if they're not proactively recognizing it, guess what? At a review or with mentors or with other people in the organization, you can bring that up, and then you'll have these concrete examples of things you did to better, the lives of your colleagues or the company itself, whatever it might be.
Right, right. So a couple of questions that we received when alumni RSVP'd for the event before we go to the live chat. One of them was from George, and he said, how can I maximize LinkedIn but not make it another resume?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question, George. I think too often people do kind of duplicate, even cut and paste. And I think what's nice about LinkedIn is it's just kind of a mini snapshot. A resume might be a little bit more detail oriented and kind of have more of those situation, action, results that we talked about. Whereas LinkedIn, the best LinkedIns I think are, just the job and then maybe a sentence or two. Whereas in a resume, I'm saying stick to the bullet points, stick to the results. Here it might be like, ran and managed a recruiting firm with, 9 employees, revenues of whatever, handling all the day-to-day functions as well as business development. A one-line kind of executive summary of what you did under each position is really what you're looking for within LinkedIn, so that people can get a good overview, but then request a resume for you. Along those lines, just worth saying, make sure that your resume and your LinkedIn are aligned and that the dates are similar, if not exactly the same, preferably, because sometimes there's conflicts there, and that, again, could be a detail orientation thing, could be a question of integrity, a number of things. So, spot check those and maybe have someone take a glance like, does it look like I'm saying the same thing in both of these places?
Great point. So as a reminder for those watching, if you want to submit a question in the live chat, it's in the upper right-hand corner. So I'm going to go to some of those now. So from M. Lee, they ask, rather than resumes in chronological order, what's the perception of resumes that are laid out to focus on skills, such as leadership, marketing, etc., if you don't have a lot of job experience?
Yeah, kind of depends. I'll answer it two ways, because I think there's probably some more experienced folks on the call for whom I might have a different answer. I'll tell you, when I don't like a skills resume is when someone is trying to do it to mask something else, right? Let's say we sometimes have candidates who have 40 or 50 years of experience, and they're worried that if they have all those years on there, people are going to discriminate on age. And so they try to do this bucket thing. And then it's like, okay, now I'm just scratching my head to figure out this person's story. So don't do it to cover something. In that case, by the way, in case those folks are listening right now, I would rather have you kind of focus on your last 10 or 15 years of experience and then kind of have a little summary showing your earlier career, but still keep it chronological and just not have too many specifics down there. But for the opposite of that, folks who don't have that much experience, I think the skills part of a resume could work out pretty well. You may still want to have a little bit of a chronological timeline, just showing, even your, jobs that you had during college or something like that. Maybe that's just at the bottom and shows the times, but then you have kind of the majority of your kind of action result part bucketed by the functional areas or the skills that this role is looking for. And I want to be clear that I do think it's important to have a resume that is fairly customized for that particular job. So I know how it is. I mean, I haven't looked for a job for a long time because I just own the company and you don't have to interview. But I remember there were a number of different things that I was interested in. I was at one point looking at nonprofit as well as looking at, kind of corporate roles. And I had different resumes for those because I wanted to emphasize different experiences. As you might imagine, my nonprofit one emphasized my volunteer work way more than the other. So I think it's important to customize that, and the same might go for how you structure it.
Right, right. Another question that's on here that was actually submitted in advance as well, so clearly a hot topic. Brian asked, what do employers think about a long period of unemployment, or advice on how to address a gap in your resume, in your cover letter, and in interviews?
It's a great one. It kind of depends on what caused the gap, right? So I'm a mom. I understand a lot of people when they're parents, they have to take some time off, or they might take some time off for another kind of family situation, an ailing relative, something like that. I think it's perfectly okay to include that on your job description, or sorry, on your resume, even if you just have the years or months, whatever it was, caring for, whoever it might be, or, maternity, took time to raise my, I've seen kind of joking ways to say CEO of my household and, raising two crazy boys, whatever it might be. So something like that is kind of fine to do. You can just leave the gap on there. I think if you really didn't do anything professional during those years, it's a little bit trickier to get around, because I even think if you're on maternity leave, or you took 4 years off, to raise your kids, or 10 years, whatever it might be, I would argue that you probably still during that time did some things that are worth putting on a resume, whether it's, taking a class, or getting involved in the PTA, or getting involved in some other organization. Putting those on there is really helpful. If they're not actually on your resume, you should at least be upfront about them in an interview. The worst thing that can happen to your integrity, I think, is when people start thinking you're kind of covering something up, right? So if someone's walking me through their resume and they just skip over a whole 5-year gap in there, and I have to say, oh, I see there are 5 years there that you didn't discuss. What's the deal? That is way worse than them just saying, yeah, and after I left, I had to leave that job because my grandmother got sick in India and I needed to move there to take care of them. While I was there, I, took this course and helped with my family business. As long as it's explained, it's totally great and it's acceptable. And particularly if you showed that you kind of continued to try to learn and kind of keep tabs on things.
Right. So kind of preparing that narrative so that you're ready when they ask.
It too. I mean, if it's related to a layoff and you were just unemployed, you need to practice how you talk about that, because I can always tell when it's the, first or second time someone said it, they sound very embarrassed and ashamed. And guess what? Everyone's been laid off. If you haven't been laid off yet, you're going to be laid off. It happens. I was laid off. I was a top performer and I was laid off. My company shut down. Like, it happens. Okay. So not my company, someone else's company that I was working for, but knock on wood. But it happens. People understand this. Picking up and becoming something, rising from the ashes, is a really great story. So don't hide it. Practice how you talk about it. Run through your resume with a friend or former coworker, whoever it might be, a career coach. Plug for UCLA, right? There's a lot of people there who will listen to how you talk about yourself, and you really need to have that practiced and say it with a smile, say it confidently, and people will understand.
Yeah. Another question here from Pepe. It says, if you fail on an interview for one company, what's the time gap before you can be interviewed next time?
Meaning, let's say you were applying for Google, you went all the way through the interview process and the job went to someone else. Do you apply for well, if it's another job, apply that minute, right? There's nothing more exciting for a recruiter than, a strong candidate who wasn't a fit for one role, who's open to another role. As long as it's not like you applied for finance and now it's marketing and they're like, what is this guy's story? So, I think showing that you're really interested in the company and the mission, you're okay in a variety of, kind of levels or functional, kind of ranges, I think is cool. So apply right away. If it's something where, you applied for a financial analyst role, you didn't get the job, 6 months later, that job is still sitting there open, don't apply again. They've seen you for that role. They're not interested. They have your resume on file. They have, spoken to you. So that, is a little bit different. But if there's another role that's similar, or if a year later, the role comes open again and you now do have different experience, update your resume, maybe include a cover letter and explain, hey, I really loved going through the process, didn't get the role last time, but would love to be reconsidered now that I've done X, Y, and Z. That's fine. That's great.
Great. Another question here that I've heard a lot about in terms of some of our events in our career programming, EC asks, how do you get your application noticed when switching industries and competing against those who have more direct experience? And if you've already tailored your resume to show the transferable skills, is there any specific advice in that situation?
Yeah, there is. So first of all, I'll go back to my, I think it was my number 9 tip, which was leverage your network. The best way to kind of get past someone looking at your resume and saying, I don't get it, this person's not a fit for that, is to have someone else hand the resume to that person and say, hey, I know she looks like she's more of a finance person, but she's awesome at a lot of things, so we should consider her for this ops role. Done and done, right? And then I'll give 2 other tips. One is, I always like to tell people to make one move or another. Either move industries and stay in your same functional area, or move functional areas and stay in your same company, right? It's much easier for your company where you've been performing and doing a great job to take a chance on you in a different functional area because they know you, than it is for a brand new company to see that kind of that double whammy kind of move. So think about that kind of strategy. I'd rather see you move to a different function in your company, and then a year later, now you're a marketing person. So it's way easier to shift over to a different company or a different industry. The final thing I will say, if I remember it, okay, we talked about networking. How do you shift? Oh, cover letters. So a lot of times people ask, like, when should we use one? What's the point of it? This is a time when you could use one. A great cover letter can get someone to look at your resume when they normally wouldn't. A crappy cover letter can only do you harm. Even if you're a perfect candidate, I'm not going to look at your resume at all if you call me sir, for example, or if you have the wrong company in there, or if it's just kind of the generic cover letter. But if you really have some transferable skills and you have a story as to why you want to make this shift in a very concise and proofread way, you can, in a couple of sentences, explain why those skills are transferable, and that is a good time to use a cover letter.
Great. So I think we have time for one last question from our live chat. So this comes from Julie, and Julie says, would you consider paying a career coach or a headhunter a good investment? And if so, what should be the requirements of the contract?
Oh my gosh, you should never pay a headhunter. Yeah, headhunters, if they're charging you, they're scamming you. So don't pay them. But career coaches, yes. I think I honestly don't know enough about how they charge or what the structure is. My understanding, because we partner with a number of career coaches that we recommend out, most of them have like hey, it's 3 sessions with me and here's the rate. Something like that, maybe a couple $100, maybe up to like $500 for like 3 sessions is probably, that's more for like a senior type of person, is probably, around the ballpark of what I would think that investment would look like. And, that's 3 hours of kind of looking at your resume, helping you think about a strategy, looking at different companies, whatever. No one is going to find you a job. That's not anyone's job. A career coach can help you find a job, but make sure you have those expectations. I think I'm glad I have the opportunity to talk about the best way to work with headhunters so that I can educate all of you as to the best way to do that, because a lot of times people think that headhunters are really going to help you find a job. Unfortunately, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but we're not doing that. We're helping companies find candidates, and it's a pretty big difference. And it's if you have that in mind, you might interact with us differently, because I can't tell you how often, I mean, like literally 10 to 15 times a day, I'll get emails from candidates saying, hey, here's my resume. Can we hop on the phone and chat, and can, we meet for coffee and you can talk to me about what I should do when I grow up? You don't want me in that business. You want a career coach in that business. You want me out there talking to companies, figuring out what kind of jobs they have open and getting those open and start working on them. You want me focused on the companies. So let me do that. Sure, you can ask, hey, whatever your process is best. If it's helpful to hop on the phone, I'd love to do that, or meet in person, but let me know the best way. I mostly just wanted to get my resume into your system because it seems like you have a lot of jobs that are really aligned with my skill set. That's like music to my ears. I always want great candidate resumes in my system, but I don't want them to follow up if I haven't, given them critique on their resume 24 hours later. Like, that's just not the business we're in. So be aware of that and kind of manage your expectations when you're dealing with headhunters. The other thing is follow their directions. Whenever I'm posting a job, I say, hey, if this looks interesting to you, please apply via the link below. If I get an email response to that with the resume there and they didn't apply via the link below, guess what? Another reason to just knock them out of the pile, because they can't listen to directions. I can't possibly recommend that they go talk to my client. Hopefully It's a little harsh, but hopefully it's helpful.
No, but it's the truth. So as we wrap up, what's that one thing that the Bruins who are listening, if there's one thing that they should remember from this conversation, what would it be?
Well, maybe I didn't cover this, but I will say optimism goes a long way. I kind of am telling you all the things not to do, and it's a harsh world out there and all that, but I can't tell you how much an incredible attitude and optimism will do for you, both in kind of just getting up every day and applying for jobs and going through the process and networking and all of that. But also when it comes to interviews, we can tell right away if someone is just downtrodden and jaded and it doesn't feel good, and I get it, man. When you're searching for a job, it can be really tiring and stressful, and it's like one of the hardest things ever. So before you get on that Skype interview, whatever you need to do, practice smiling, slap yourself in the face to wake up, have some caffeine, have some carrot juice, whatever works. Make sure that your energy and enthusiasm is there, because this could be your next big thing. And you have to have that optimism and you have to think positively about that. I also think when you're doing those kind of interviews, especially if it's a phone interview, I mean, if you're just sounding blah, blah, or you're, got your head in your hands and you're having the conversation casually, we can sense that energy. If you're, on the other hand, looking in a mirror while you're having the interview and you're standing and you're gesticulating and you're super excited, we can feel that. So just be aware of that energy and make sure that, you're putting your best foot forward. You'll get a great job. Don't worry about it. It may not be your first job. It may not be this next job, but you'll land there. You'll get there. Everyone does. So be optimistic.
I love that, especially with our Optimist campaign at UCLA. That is very on brand, Kate.
Oh, I didn't know that. You check
well, yeah, you do. That was fantastic. Well, thank you, Kate. Your advice and insights were both practical and invaluable for all the Bruins out there who are job searching. To everyone who's watching, thank you again for joining us and participating in tonight's discussion. If you missed a portion of the event, you can always find it on the UCLA Alumni YouTube channel. It'll be there immediately after we end. And as mentioned in our intro, this is the third event in our Bruin Career Insights series. So please send us your questions, your thoughts, and your ideas for upcoming topics. We want this programming to be tailored to your interests. And so for that, we need your input. So send us an email at careerprograms@alumni.ucla.edu. Thank you to Kate and to everyone who's watching, and a special thank you again to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like this possible, and we hope you'll tune in for our April Bruin Career Insights event. Have a great evening and go Bruins!